Earlier this year, we highlighted concerns over China's Belt and Road Initiative that critics say is a debt trap for developing countries that get involved and are unable to repay their loans they receive from the Chinese Communist Party. The latest case in point is Uganda's only international airport. Entebbe International Airport is reportedly at risk of being taken over by the Chinese Communist Party because the government has failed to modify their loan arrangement. Now, what can we draw from this? What's going on with China? Is this about investment, about trade, or is there a bigger agenda here? With us now to talk about this is Asia expert Gordon Chang, author of The Coming Collapse of China and the Great U.S.-China Tech War. He can be found on Twitter at Gordon G. Chang. Gordon, welcome back to Washington Watch.
Thank you so much, Tony.
All right, so the Uganda, their only airport there in Entebbe, which, by the way, is a pretty historic place because that's where the first anti-terrorist raid took place, where the Israelis went in years ago. But the Chinese are about to take over this airport. Tell us what's going on here.
Well, there are reports that China has already foreclosed on the airport because Uganda borrowed $200 million in 2017 from China's Export-Import Bank. Now, both Beijing and the Ugandan civil aviation authorities deny that, but clearly Uganda has not been able to pay back, which means there is going to be some rearrangement of loan terms. And we saw something very similar in Hambantota in Sri Lanka in 2017, where Sri Lanka couldn't pay back 5 loans, and China essentially took over the port. So probably something similar is going to happen if it hasn't happened already.
So, Gordon, is this like, this almost sounds like loan sharks because you've got this, as I understand, it was a loan, $270 million at 2% upon disbursement with a 20-year maturity period and a 7-year grace period. So did they default on some of the initial payments? And so China's coming in. What's unfolding here?
Yeah, they're not paying back. And at issue are some particular clauses in the loan agreements which appear to be unusual. Now, in many of China's Belt and Road loans, there are these pretty onerous clauses. So, for instance, in this case, there is a clause that requires that any sort of dispute be conducted in China with the Chinese arbitration authorities, which means that China is going to win every dispute. Apparently, China is not willing to negotiate on those 5 or 6 loan clauses. So it appears that there is going to be a default or basically a loan arrangement which will take care of a potential default.
So Gordon Chang, under normal circumstances, when you have disputes between countries, this would go to an international setting in terms of dealing with the dispute?
Well, in the loan agreements, there will be dispute resolution clauses. So you will go to, for instance, and a typical one involving international loans means you go to the courts of New York State or to U.S. federal courts. But there are these provisions in loan agreements. And in China's provisions, it's essentially the Chinese courts. The problem, Tony, is that nobody thinks that Chinese arbiters of fact and law are going to be any sort of neutral. And right. People use New York or use U.S. courts because they feel that they'll get a fair shake. Nobody feels that way about China.
Now, in reading this, Gordon, it sounded as if they were surprised that this was in the loan agreement. Is this the fine print that they just didn't bother to read or didn't see, or what's going on here?
Well, in many of these Belt and Road loan agreements, there are these extremely onerous provisions. And some of them actually prevent disclosure of the terms of the loans to the public. And that appears to be the case here as well. And it's really because China has corrupted elites to get these Belt and Road loans. And so apparently there are some provisions here which make it extremely difficult for debtors. But, a lot of these countries don't care because the leaders have been paid off well in advance. So therefore, these types of provisions are thought to be common in Chinese loans.
So Gordon, this was launched by China back in 2013, the Belt and Road Initiative. Now, their claim was this was to help further trade also to be a form of investment. But is there a bigger agenda here that they're taking advantage of mostly developing countries?
Yeah, the agenda here is to control the world. What they want to do is control trade flows. So there are a lot of these projects which are considered to be uneconomic, ones that the private sector would not finance. China's been willing to come in because for various reasons, local elites like to sign up these because they get paid off. And the projects are not economic. So we're seeing with both the belt, which is the land route, and the road, which are sea routes, a lot of these projects don't make economic sense, which is the reason why so many of them go to loan foreclosure. And by the way, China's only official offshore military base is in Djibouti, which is a country that is believed to own more than 100% of its GDP, gross domestic product, to China. So that's no coincidence.
Now, China borrows a lot of money and gets a lot of money from the World Bank, if I'm not mistaken. So why is it that they're getting special deals? Because they're supposed to be kind of a developing nation. They have a lot of poverty, but then they're loaning money out to like about 70 countries have been involved in this Belt and Road Initiative.
Yeah, this is outrageous because there's no sense for this, no justification for it. And this was also true in general, where China was actually getting development aid at the same time that Beijing was making development aid packages to other countries. So that has mostly stopped, but the lending from the World Bank has not stopped. And it is just completely unjustifiable for these multilateral institutions to make loans to China in these circumstances.
Now, we need to wake up. I mean, China is, they've got an agenda and they're working that agenda, and it's not to the benefit of the world, certainly not to the U.S. Gordon Chang, always great to talk with you. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Tony.